right, thank you for joining in on the Mountaineer Farm Talk today. We have a wonderful lineup. We got Lynn, Brad Burgerford. Am I saying that right?
Brandenberger.
Brandenberger. Brad Burgerford is a state specialist in Ohio. Brandenberger is a state specialist, horticulture specialist in Oklahoma State. So I do love the Burgerford part. I love how it rolls off the tongue. We're glad to have you here with us. Of course, everyone that's joined in before and listened to us, we know we pick a agricultural topic to talk about each week, a different one. And today we are talking about sweet corn, and we have Dr. Brad Burgerford coming from Oklahoma State. He's been there, I think you said 20 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
So he knows his way around a horticulture crop, and we are glad to have him with us today. And we also have Evan. Say hey, Evan.
Hey, I'm Evan. I'm the extension agent, as many of you all know, down here in Cabell and Wayne counties.
And we are glad to have him as well today with us too. JJ is still healing up from his hip surgery, so he's doing good. He is progressing well. To give everyone an update that knows JJ there. So we'll go ahead and kick it off with Dr. Brandon Burgerford and sweet corn. So everybody loves corn, right?
Yeah, there you go. So, I always tease people that I have a twin sister, and it was about 8th grade when I finally stopped asking her how to spell our last name. So, it's kind of long. So she was smarter and better looking, but I was a lot more fortunate in life, I think. So just before we get started, tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up on a grain and livestock operation in south central Kansas in the Arkansas River Valley. So you guys are in the Ohio River Valley. But anyway, my wife and I farmed for several years, and then went to work for Texas A&M in East Texas as a county horticulturist, and also worked for Oklahoma State at one point as a county horticulturist. And then once I got done with graduate school, went back to work for Texas A&M in South Texas, right along the border. And we had a lot of fun time down there, met some really nice people down in South Texas, and then eventually ended up back in Oklahoma, where my wife is from, because for some reason, ladies always like to live close to their blood relatives. I don't know why, but they do, that's just part of it. So I've been here about 20 years. So we're going to talk this morning a little bit about sweet corn. We've done trialing of sweet corn for probably, they've not counting my time and then the time that of other people, probably 30 years at least here in Oklahoma. We've kind of slacked off on that a little bit. The last trial that we had was in 2017. But, it's like any vegetable crop that we work with, we learn a lot more about the crop than just, there's this crop and you could grow it this way. Once you grow it and you see all the challenges and exciting part of the crop, then you understand it a lot better. So, at home, I always tease people that I've got this huge farm. It's 100 square feet. So, immediately their mind, I think, goes to acres, but it's square feet. But we grow quite a bit on 100 square feet. So we'll just dive right on in here. Just to get started with some basic, a place to find some more information. You may have fact sheets for West Virginia on sweet corn. You probably do.
Yes.
This link here on this slide is a link to our fact sheet on sweet corn for commercial production. So that's a good place to find some other information. You might compare what you guys have and what we have, and then you might call me up and say, you really need to add this thing we got in ours. And I'd appreciate that, because we we try to rewrite these about every 5 years. So one of the things that we've noticed about sweet corn is that sweet corn can be kind of sensitive to cooler soil temperatures. This particular crop is kind of in, you know, as a vegetable person, we deal with a lot of crops. So I've got my favorites, and I've got my, okay, everybody wants that, so we got to know how to do that one. And sweet corn is one of those in that last category. But it's kind of what I call the Goldilocks category, which it doesn't want it too cold, doesn't want it too hot, wants it just right, okay? So that's kind of normal for this crop. So essentially, you know, our fact sheet basically says that we can plant sweet corn from 50 degrees on up to 70 or 80 degree soil temperatures. But if you're doing super sweets, which a lot of times that's what people are producing at this point in time, really you need to up that temperature up to about 60 before you start direct seeding it. So, because it's kind of sensitive to cooler soil temperatures. Looking at the isolation requirements, and you know, if you're only growing one kind of sweet corn, you're good to go. You don't have to worry about it. But if you're growing, let's say you're growing yellow corn and then you got some white corn, or the other thing that we can have problems with is if we've got an SU1, which is the good old sweet corn that I grew up with, or a SE, which is a sugary enhanced variety. They can grow together, no problem. But if you're going to grow a super sweet and one of those, an SU1 or an SE, then you need to isolate them, because that kind of fouls everything up as far as what's going to happen with the ear of corn.
What about the distance between those varieties? Like, you know, obviously corn you plant in several rows because the wind pollinates them.
Right.
So, and that's kind of what he's talking about, you know, isolating, get them separated. So how far is far enough when it comes to separating those varieties?
Well, either, you know, our recommendation is at least 250 feet. You know, I mean, if I was a commercial sweet corn producer and it was, you know, important to me, if I could get a quarter mile, that's probably what I'd do.
Okay.
But it's not, you know, it's not miles. It's just, you know, you need several hundred feet to make that work. The other option is to plant in a different time. And so you might have a variety that's let's say an SE type, or it's yellow and then you're going to grow white. Then if that first type could be planted 2 weeks or 3 weeks ahead of the next one, then you've got this distance in time. So it's all about whether they're going to flower and set ears at the same time. You don't want that happening. Or if you do want it at the same time, then you need to spread them out space-wise, so distance. So.
And they can cross pollinate. A lot of times you might not really see a big difference, but someone gave me a little story here. Someone gave me some black sweet corn. I thought it was cool. I've never seen black sweet corn before. And I said, I'm going to grow this black sweet corn. I'll plant a couple rows out there in the garden, you know, along with, you know, my other corn. I didn't think anything about the cross pollinating because it was just garden stuff at this point. You know, I was just playing around in my personal garden. And it cross-pollinated with my other corn, and it had little dingy kind of black kernels all in it. And my wife, when when we were, you know, she knew what was going on, but when we took it somewhere, you saw these little black dots and stuff. It looked like mold in it. It wasn't mold. It was just that black kernel. And
Yeah.
if I had to be really careful when we had a potluck at the church not to get the ones that was cross-pollinated with the black sweet corn, because it looked like mold in there.
Yeah, and that gets back to the color genetics. You know, if you're growing a yellow and a white and you don't have them separated, you're going to end up with a bicolor. You're going to end up with white and yellow kernels in the same ear. So there again, if that's no big deal, and I think bicolors look pretty cool, to be honest about it. And they actually have some bicolor varieties, but if it's important to keep them separate, then you just have to separate them out, or they'll get mixed up. So that's kind of it as far as isolation that you might need to do and talking about soil temperature. The best growing temperatures that sweet corn, what it really prefers is somewhere between the high 60s to 90 degrees. Remember when we started, I talked about this crop being kind of a Goldilocks crop. It didn't want it too cool, didn't want it too hot, wants it just right. And you know, if you've grown tomatoes and been successful with that, it's basically the same temperature regime that a tomato would want. Another, what I would call a Goldilocks crop.
So you really need to wait for after that frost-free date, right? That's kind of what you're
right.
saying.
Yeah, they're not very, they don't react very well to frost.
Yeah. Well, around Mother's Day is kind of the sweet spot, a little after Mother's Day in West Virginia.
Okay.
When people kind of, you know, go wild in their garden, planting, you know, their seedlings and corn and everything. What about in Oklahoma? When's that kind of that rule of thumb date for y'all?
Our frost-free date in general is somewhere around probably the second or third week of March.
Okay.
And so we're a little bit further south than I think you guys are.
Yeah.
So that's probably why it's a little bit earlier. That said, I've seen it frost or maybe even snow a little bit in May.
Mm-hmm.
So our weather is very unpredictable, to say the least, but probably yours is too.
Yeah, we have that in that spring. It's high and low, and you know you might be in a sweatshirt one day and you know shorts and a t-shirt next. But I remember when I was at Oklahoma State, we'd show up in sweats and everything in the morning time. By the evening, you know, we done stripped down and shedded 3 layers.
Yeah, that's kind of the way it works.
Yeah. So
looking at varieties, and this is really kind of based on trials that we've done in the past. You really have 2 main groups. You've got non-GMO sweet corns, and then you have GMO sweet corns. Usually when I talk about this with commercial people here in the state or master gardeners, because GMOs can be or may not be a big thing to somebody. They might be a huge thing. So I don't really try to, what would you say, be a proponent of GMOs. But the great thing about GMO corn is that really they've got the genetics to be able to make their own Bacillus thuringiensis, which is BT. And that goes a long way towards controlling corn earworm. Several years ago, probably 15 years ago or longer, I had a trial in a grower's field, and they weren't equipped to spray anything. They were more like you guys. They were more like animal science people, and they had some alfalfa field they had plowed up, and they said, hey, we'd like for you to do a corn trial. So we did one. I couldn't spray it. I couldn't get my tractor there with a sprayer to spray it. So we had both GMO and non-GMO varieties in that trial. The only thing that we did for corn earworm control was we used a little bit of 7 dust and put that in a sock on a stick and kind of shook it, and then that dust would come out and land on the silks. And lo and behold, we were able to get sweet corn out of that trial. But in the end, you'd ask people, which one do you want to take home? Just, you wouldn't tell them what they were. And everybody said, yeah, I want to take the GMO home because it was a lot cleaner. It does not mean that you won't ever have to spray or, use something to control the corn earworm, but it does mean that you'll have to spray less and you'll get better control. So that's kind of the story on that. If your growers are interested in not growing GMOs, then we've got 3 varieties up there that have done pretty well for us. Incredible, Bodacious, Delectable have been good performers. And then we've had pretty good luck with Obsession and Passion. I looked these up on the internet when I was putting this little talk together, and Obsession is now Obsession 2 and Passion's Passion 2. These are Syngenta varieties. I think that not only did they have the BT gene in them, but they may have some kind of herbicide resistance gene in them also. I'm not certain, but and that's neither here nor there. That's really a personal decision of who's growing it. I'm not worried about it.
Well, both of those grow very well in the Ohio Valley right here in West Virginia. I love to eat corn, so I'm always interested in looking at different corns because that's what I personally grow in my garden and whatnot. So
Yeah.
I always help out with the specialists and the entomologist over the years. I work really well with Daniel Franks. He's actually moved over to Virginia Tech now. And we grew a lot of the BT corn, and we grew a lot of the non-BT corn and kind of compared them. And we found some resistance, actually, to a little bit of resistance starting in some of the BT corn with some of the earworms, and we documented and everything over the years. But those BT varieties, they taste wonderful. They produce very well. The earworm will actually get in these varieties, but they will die when they're real small. And I mean, there's hardly any noticeable damage. Or of course, you have to cut off about 2 inches of the ear because it's slimy and ate up, right?
Yeah.
So if you're commercial, you almost have to go with something or spray or go with a GMO. But if you're gardening, you can get away with these non-GMOs. You're just going to be cutting the tip of the ear off. And then you got to plant enough for you, the earworms, and the raccoons, and the deer. So if you cover those 4 bases, you will have enough corn to put in your freezer.
Yeah, you got a point there. And it seems like the deer and the raccoons know exactly when it's ready to go. So
They do.
Yeah. I usually tell people that I eat a lot of GMO sweet corn, and each spring I just get that extra toe cut off. Gross because of eating GMOs, but kind of joke about it. But it's got to do with what people are comfortable with and what your customers, if you're commercial, what your customers are comfortable with. If they're okay with it, then I'd say grow it. But if they're not, then don't. So. Establishment, we almost always direct seed sweet corn. We usually start after the frost-free date, and then, even though the temperature that's recommended is from 50 to 75 or 85 degrees, then I really think 60 is probably a little better temperature to go with. Now, I do have a friend that works for Langston, which is our sister land-grant university here in Oklahoma, and he does sweet corn on black plastic mulch and drip tape.
Okay.
And so that's going to heat that soil up faster, going to get you to market quicker. So that's an idea. If people, particularly, if you're not a huge grower, but let's say you've got an acre or 2 and you really would like to get to market early, and that's a possibility, would be black plastic mulch and drip tape. The other thing that will get you to market earlier, and when we're talking about commercial producers, the early bird gets the money. I mean, that's what it all boils down to. You know, if you're in the market for 2 weeks before anybody else is, you make a killing. Yeah. So I've got one grower, actually, he's my predecessor, Jim Moats. He's still farming. He market gardens at home. He's probably got about 5 or 6 acres. And he transplants sweet corn. So in 17, which is the last corn trial we did, we also did a transplanting trial. I think the earliest date that we transplanted was towards the end of February. Now that's insane, but you know, when you're trying to experiment with things, you need to check out the extremes. You know, you don't want to start, well, what's the best date to plant and go with that one. You want to push the envelope. So I think we transplanted that corn, and the very next, that night it got killed. Okay. But then our next planting date was about 2 weeks later, and it went on through and did okay, you know. And then the planting after that was still earlier than our normal planting as being transplanted. So that's an idea if you're really trying to get early, and if you have a small enough operation that you can afford the time and effort to do that. You know, if you're doing hundreds of acres, I wouldn't go there. But you know, if you're doing quarter acre patches, you know, several plantings, it might be worth a try.
We do have some black plastic growers right on the other side of the river in Ohio. They grow it on black plastic. I'm not sure if they transplant it. Now they're very progressive, so it wouldn't surprise me if they tried it.
Yeah.
But they do a good job. I was praying when you said you know, get it to the bar. I said, don't say high tunnel. Don't say high tunnel.
No, I don't think high tunnel is the place to grow sweet corn. I'll be honest about it. I guess you could.
No, and I was hoping you wouldn't say high tunnel because I've spent a lot of time telling people not to put it in high tunnels.
Yeah. We've got a small high tunnel at home that we built because I really felt like I needed to understand how that system works. And again, you know, unless you do it, it's hard to really understand it. You can read all you want, but it's been really good for cool season leafy greens, which normally we run from fall clear up into probably we can go into May or June with greens in a high tunnel. And then it works great for things like tomatoes, peppers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I got some really good, I got one, you know, one of the largest tomato producers in the state here in my county, and he transplants towards the end of February with his tomatoes, and he's already probably about done picking. And then, you know, he goes into pumpkins and other things, but, you know, he could probably get a cucumber crop in after the tomatoes and then probably get 2 or 3 green harvests at lettuce or whatever if he wanted to in there as well. So, you know, if you were out there and you don't put, because it's all about dollars per square foot when you're in a high tunnel. That's what it comes down to.
Yep.
And you know, there's a lot of crops that work great. Getting them out early, like you say, was the key. But corn in a high tunnel, don't do it, folks. Don't do it.
I don't think I'd go there. I mean, I might try it, but I just don't think it's going to work. You know,
it works, but it's just your dollars per square foot.
Yeah.
It doesn't add up economically.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Yeah, Evan, what did you have a question?
Those guys that do the black plastic, how much earlier are they just getting in the market a couple weeks earlier? How does that work? Because I know I've got a guy down here. He's always trying to push earlier.
Yeah, I would say you could probably pick up a couple weeks at least. You need to get it down probably a month before you're planning on planting.
Okay.
I've messed with plastics some, done some research with it. The biggest problem with plastic mulch is cleanup and disposal.
Right.
And to be honest with you, our larger growers in the state, in other words, you know, we've got some fairly large watermelon, pumpkins, sweet potato growers, that sort of thing. They don't mess with it. They say it's just too much of a mess. But it's our smaller growers, the people that are, they might have a 1 or 2 acre planting of something.
Right.
They're using it, but realize that cost and effort that goes into cleanup and disposal, because it's, we did a bunch of studies when I was with A&M in South Texas looking at different mulches. And, the thing is, back then we figured pickup and disposal cost was somewhere, it started about $75 an acre on up to maybe $200, $250 per acre,
Right.
depending on how well the mulch held together. So, you have to kind of factor that in. Don't just think, well, it's all,
Those
grins and
extra 2 weeks
giggles.
really worth the time and effort and the money you're putting into it.
Yeah. I think what I would suggest if people want to try it is try it, on a 1/10 of an acre or 1/4 of an acre and see what you think. If you think, wow, this is the cat's meow, then go for it. But, and it's that way with varieties, everything.
Mhm.
Just, try them on a small basis on the farm. And then if it works, great. If it doesn't, you didn't lose much. You didn't lose the farm because I spent $3,000 an acre putting all these crops in, so
Right.
kind of keep that in mind. The other thing about some specifics on sweet corn production, fertilization, we always recommend that our growers go ahead and soil test at least once a year. But I'd say sometimes if you have someone that's really intensive, they might be soil testing between each crop, because in a small operation, you pull out one thing, you plant the next, but base the phosphorus and potassium on the soil test. Nitrogen is one of those nutrients that it's not really held by the soil because soil's got a negative charge in nitrate, which is the preferred, or the only way the plant's going to take up nitrogen is that also has a negative charge, so they don't hook into each other and grab on and hang on. Whereas phosphorus, the forms of phosphorus that we use, and potassium do have positive charges, so the soil particles will actually latch onto them and hang on to them, so they don't just whoosh gone. The thing about nitrogen is, if let's say I say, well, I need 110 pounds of nitrogen, so I put it all out pre-plant, and then I get what we call in this part of the world a toad strangler. It's gone. Whoosh! It's just like flushing the toilet. It's gone. And environmentally, that's a mess. And then pocketbook wise, that's a real mess too, because now you didn't really get any good out of it. So we would encourage people to use a split application, maybe up to a half of the nitrogen put down pre-plant. I would say more like a third or a fourth, and then at least 2 other side dresses to apply the rest of the nitrogen. If you've got a crop on drip irrigation, then put all the P and K down pre-plant, put down maybe a 1/4 of the nitrogen that you need, and then figure out how many weeks that crop's going to be in the ground, and then take however many pounds of nitrogen you need to put on per acre and run it through that drip. That's the cat's meow. If you lose 5 or 10 pounds of nitrogen, big deal. It didn't do much to the environment, and it didn't do much to your pocketbook. But if you lose 100 pounds of nitrogen, that can be quite painful, both directions, environmentally and money-wise. So,
Especially with the prices today. I mean, fertilizer just keeps going up.
yeah,
I mean, I've fertilized a little bit and not much, because I'm fertilizing pastures, which looks like the ratio is about the same as the ratio in grass, but a little bit more intense because of the production wise.
yeah.
And that you had there, and that makes sense. But what about before we get into harvest here? I got a question. We was talking about the mulch. It's also a weed block. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, you're reducing that competition for those nutrients we're putting out. What do you think about, you know, I usually do not use the mulch with the corn, but that's a possibility. I use a pre-emergent and sometimes a post-emergent if I have to, herbicide. What's your thoughts on those?
Um, well, we almost always use pre-emergence when we're putting in trials. I've done quite a bit of weed work in my career because nobody really trained to be a weed scientist for vegetables. But you know, we've had pretty good luck with dual magnum. I think it's labeled for corn. I'm pretty sure it is.
It is.
But that's been a good old standby for us. There are several other materials that you might try, but they don't come to mind. But yeah, I would start off, I would plant, you know, if you got a pre-plant incorporated, or if you've got just a pre-emergence type that you can put down just after planting, and then water it in. And that's the key to getting most pre-emergence to work. You've got to incorporate it somehow. If it's not a pre-plant incorporated where you're actually physically working it into the soil, then what you have to do is you've got to either get a rain or you've got to overhead irrigate it. So drip doesn't cut it.
Yeah, and what I know, all chemicals, they're different parts of the country, and you can get some probably know Oklahoma where you can't get them here. Each state labels them differently and everything else.
Yeah.
But in West Virginia, I planted a half-acre trap crop this year for a new entomologist to see when the earworm's coming in. So what I've done this year, in the past, I used Lexar. Lexar was great. It worked wonderfully. You plant the corn, 4 days later, you spray it. It worked beautifully if you get that rain to incorporate it in. And you can tell every spot that you missed. It works nicely. This year, I couldn't get it. It was on back order and everything else. But they make something, well, you already said one of them, dual magnum. You can use Calypso, and there's a generic called Explorer, which is the same thing as Calypso. That's a pre-emergent and a post-emergent. It's got a little bit more flexibility. And then Prowl H2O, which you have to spray on 2 weeks or so before you actually plant. I just was curious to see one year what happens if you spray it after it comes up. Don't do that. Spray it 2 weeks before. The patch that I played around with, just see what would happen, was about 4 foot shorter than everything else.
Yeah.
So read the label. Don't experiment like I did, but use it as labeled, and it will work for you.
Yeah, actually, there have been times in the past where some weed scientists have actually gone in and had a field day of, we're going to demonstrate to you what happens when you don't follow the label, and you know, all the bad things that happen to the crop. So that was probably a really good experience for you to have with that. I mean, you know, you got it right here. You know, don't do that. You know, there's a reason.
Well, I was able to show people, because I tell them research sometimes is not all about finding what you want to see, is what's finding what you do not want to do.
Right.
And that's just part of the research that we do in extension. And some of the most valuable things wasn't even part of the hypothesis I was trying to make. I found out what not to do as well.
Yeah. Been there, done that.
So I'm sorry, I slowed you up. Let's get to harvest here. I apologize.
So sweet corns usually, you know, the variety description will say, you know, it's a 70-day corn or 72-day corn or a 68-day corn or a 90-day corn, whatever. So just kind of be cognizant or think about what that means to you and your operation. You know, that's just kind of a target. It's not, you know, you're probably not going to land right on that date, but gives you some idea. Over the years, and really the sweet corn trials were really done by a friend of mine, Brian Kahn, until he retired. And what he really saw, and we've seen it too, is the real early corns in Oklahoma. They don't get very tall. They're not really productive. They'll make some sweet corn, but sure wouldn't bet the farm on them as far as, paying off the note or whatever. So we like those probably mid-season corns rather than the real early ones if I was going to plant commercially. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing about when to harvest, back in the day when we used the SU1s, which was the old sweet corns that I grew up with, they always used to tell us that, you take your thumbnail, you punch your one kernel. If it's milky, then it's ready to go. That does not work with super sweets at all. I don't even think it works with sugar enhanced, but because the sap in the kernels never really gets milky. So you have to kind of shift how you figure this out then. So, you look at how well filled it is, and you can tell that just by feeling up and down the ear. Of course, look at the silk colors. Once they turn a dark brown or almost black, you're almost there. And then ear color, or the kernel colors, if it's got, if it's a bicolor or if it's a yellow, that yellow will start out really pale and then it just gets more and more intense. And so you can kind of base, where you're at based on the color difference. If it's a white, lots of luck. I don't know what to tell you, but that works if you've got yellow kernels. If you're wanting multiple harvests, I would suggest using successive planting. In other words, I might plant the first batch and then a couple of weeks later I plant the next batch. I don't know if a week would give you enough space and time to make that work out, because sometimes plants are kind of like, oh, I got to catch up to my neighbors, and off they go, and they come in about the same time. So I'll probably space them out a couple of weeks. If you're hand harvesting, then yeah, you'll use some kind of basket, or we've got a really poor picture, but a picture of a commercial machine harvester there that's getting sweet corn out. So post-harvest, you want to make sure you get this corn cooled off as fast as possible. Corn is primarily sugar, and so you can store it really cold. I mean, 32 degrees is, that's freezing. So, but I'd say if you can hit somewhere between 32, 35, 38, somewhere in there, it's going to keep a lot longer, and then higher relative humidity. So one thing good about the sugar enhanced types, you've got a little longer shelf life than the old SU1s. So that's a good thing. And you think about it, I mean, what do you do if you want to keep food for a long time? You either cook it to death, you put it in a can and heat it up, or you put a lot of sugar in it, i.e. preserves or jellies or something like that, and it lasts a long time. So these corns have a lot of sugar in them, and that's the main thing we're after. There's not much nutrition in sweet corn, but guess what? Get out of my way when it's in season. I want my sweet corn just like everybody else. You can find the grades for post-harvest grades at this website that I've given you here. It's usually I check all these websites before I give a talk, and that one's still good. So that's something you might want to think about too.
Okay.
The other thing that I wanted to hit on was, it may not all be grins and giggles, okay? We may not be, just tickled to death because we got so much money we don't know what to do with it. Things happen. Poor ear fill is one of those things. That could be because of drought. It could be if you got some really weird weather, it might cause problems with that. It could be poor pollination because you don't have enough rows, and usually we recommend at least 4 rows of sweet corn to get pollination. The last time we did a trial, we had a sweet corn trial. we had one variety that did not come up. I mean, all the seed must have been dead, nothing. And everywhere that darn thing was at, because, in an experimental plot, you've got them randomized and you got it replicated. Everywhere that thing occurred, we had poor kernel fill by those varieties that were somewhere in that vicinity because we didn't get good cross-pollination. So this is a real thing. Disease-wise, you got all sorts of things: rust, blight, smut. And insect-wise, really, primary insect is the corn earworm, but corn seed maggot, grubworm, cutworm, fall armyworm, all that can be a problem. So normally what I recommend is as soon as you see silks, you probably need to start spraying for corn earworm. Don't think, well, I'll get that next week or in a couple of weeks. No, you need to start today. So I would encourage commercial producers to go ahead and, have everything on hand, have your equipment ready to go. And as soon as you begin to see silks, then you need to start spraying. And we usually, when we were doing a lot of corn trials several years ago, we'd usually spray at least twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. So you just got to keep that material on there. And particularly if you're using something like, you can buy BT and spray it. And anytime you get a heavy dew or any kind of rain, you need to reapply it because it washes it off. So just kind of set that in your mind and keep that foremost, because that's, if you can bring nice, clean, sweet corn to the market, you won't have any trouble selling it. People will buy it.
Now, when is your, well, you might have this coming up here, the market that you shoot for in Oklahoma, when are you selling your most sweet corn?
We're probably late May, somewhere in there.
So you are a little bit ahead. Well, it makes sense. You plant earlier so you can harvest off. We usually try to hit June, July. And it's kind of funny. I've noticed the sweet corn sales go down after kids go back to school. And I think that's a labor force thing with silting and shucking and everything. But I've noticed a lot of the sweet corn sales go down after kids go back to school. So if you're selling big bags of sweet corn, if you can get that out in the summertime before those kids go back to school, it moves a lot faster.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's a good thought. I'm an old farm kid, so I started pretty early.
Yeah.
Okay, just kind of summing things up. Check your state's extension fact sheets. Okay, so that's important. If you guys have corn trials, it sounds like you do, then definitely check those results, and that will help you a lot in deciding what to use. If you're seeing some really great things happening in university trials, then I would suggest that farmers would try, 2 or 3 of those varieties on a small basis. If they've grown sweet corn for years and they've done well, but they're wanting to try something new, try a small planting of 2 or 3 and see what you think. It doesn't take very long, and university-wise, we're always talking about statistics, but I always remember there was a horticulture specialist down in San Antonio, and he always said, "Here's my statistics. If I drive up to the farm and the guy meets me at the gate with a gun, he doesn't like what we tried." Or if he's mad. Yeah. If he walks out and he just got this big goofy grin on his face and you say, "How did things go?" and he won't tell you how much money he made, and says, that's significant. Okay, that means significantly you improved his situation. So those are kind of were his takes on statistics, and I don't think that's a bad way to think about it. But try it on a small basis is what I'm saying. Keep your eye on pests, particularly corn earworm. You know, sweet corn is one of those things that not only do we like it, but like you said earlier, the raccoons like it, the deer like it, and the corn earworm likes it. So keep an eye on that, and then try something new. You might try, you know, a few 100-foot a row of transplants or something like that. See what you think. Brian Kahn one year did some, well, actually a couple of years, he did some work with fall sweet corn. And it seemed like he got that to work. He did have a few more disease problems with fall sweet corn. But, you know, I mean, again, it's, if you're in the market when nobody else is, a lot of times you can make pretty decent money. So those are some things you might want to try that are kind of new, might be new ideas. You might say, no, we've been doing that for 20 years. What are you talking about? But might give that a whirl. So that's about all I've got. I'll be glad to try to answer questions.
Do y'all have farm to school programs in Oklahoma?
I think we still do. We had a person that helped develop that program and just did a fantastic job. And then she changed jobs to another group of people. And they, you know, it's one of those kind of fall through the cracks thing, but I think it's still going.
Okay, I know corn, what we struggle with is when a lot of our crops come off because we had to plant a little later.
Yeah.
Kids are out of school for the summer. So we lose that particular market in around the state. But, you know, some of these fall crops, if you can push it back, and now corn, you may want to talk to your cooks first because you still have to shuck it and silt it. And that sometimes runs into problems, the handling of that. But other crops work well. So you might try those fall crops and get them into the school even.
Yeah, I think, you know, probably my favorite fall crops are the cool season greens. And you know, it just depends on what is kind of popular in your area. I mean, I could eat collards till the cows come home, but not everybody likes collards, you know. So, you know, spinach, you know, there's a lot of those that can be used fresh or cooked. So, and a lot of those will produce through the winter.
Okay, and some of them will hold through the winter because me and Evan both, we worked on a project with Dr. Lewis Jett. He's always got something going, Dr. Jett.
Oh, there's your high tunnel guy. No wonder you're talking about high tunnel.
He's our horticulture specialist. He's our main guy for horticulture in our state. And he come up with this idea that he's going to overwinter cabbage. Well, I said, okay, well, I've tried things and, you know, they've actually worked there. Some of your idea, you know, so kind of an off the wall idea. He wanted to try it and it worked. You know, we planted them later. We wintered them, and we were able to harvest them a lot earlier there in the springtime where you can get a crop in behind them. Yeah. So so there are crops like cabbage you can overwinter. Now some you have to look at the varieties. You have to look at the trial. Google that West Virginia cabbage project. He'll have a fact sheet probably by this fall, but there were varieties that overwintered better. Some of the varieties were ready to go in December, actually, and some of the farmers picked those and harvested them already. I had it in a research high tunnel, and it hurt me to see that cabbage ready to harvest, but I still let it go because it's research. That's what you do. But so there are things that you can even overwinter. Brussels sprouts. I've done a Brussels sprout trial.
Yeah, we did. We've had 2 years of sprouts trials. The first year was kind of figuring out how to do it, and the second year, which was this year, things turned out pretty good. So good. And you might you could check our university, or well, actually our department's website. We put all our trial reports. Well, actually, no. Go to Extension Publications now. They've kind of taken it over. But you can go back. We've got 10 years of trial reports. I used to have 20, and they said, no, you're taking up too much space. I said, okay, well, whatever. And they were like, well, why are you putting these on here anyway? It's like, well, dude, why do you think we do trials? I mean,
And
but anyway, there's a lot of information there. And in the last 10 or 15 years, we include not only, data tables and narrative about it, but we also include a lot of pictures.
okay, good.
So like a lot of times in a variety trial, you'll see pictures of each variety, and you can kind of get a little better feel for what things look like. Cabbage trials, actually, we've got a lot of pictures of cabbage, but we also did testing of what they tasted like, how sweet they were.
Yeah.
It's just a subjective test. The technician and I both would chew it and decide, what kind of rating we were going to give it. If it was a 10, it was like, hey, give me some more of that. That was a 10.
Yeah.
And if it was a 1, it was like, chomp, chomp. Yeah, that's nasty stuff. So
we did that with watermelons. I really enjoyed that. But they actually had a scientific bricks measurement. They took the bricks, and that's just, I guess, the sugar content measure. And we've done that as well. But I really enjoyed the taste test part on the watermelon trial we done.
So anyway, that's information you guys definitely could access. And, it might give you an idea what kind of trials you might want to do or what you might want to include in the trial. I don't know.
Well, thank you so much. And I think this has been a great, podcast here. And I think the people that come back and watch this will really get a lot of information out of this. But if you have any questions, feel free to contact your local extension agent. I'm John David in Jackson County, Evans in Cabell and Wayne. So you got Ben and Mason, Brandy and Roan. So feel free to contact any of your local extension agent or any one of us. We'll answer any questions. But it was a pleasure having you on, Dr. Brandenberger. I'm going to have to tell Brad Bergerford I cussed a fellow the other day.
Brandenberger.
Yes, Brandenberger.
Yeah, there you go.
But I'll have to tell Brad Bergerford about that. I said, I confused you. I said, I cussed the man, didn't even know him. But thank you so much for joining in with us on the Mountaineer Farm Talk, the voice of West Virginia agriculture.
All right, you guys take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.